from a blood clot behind her right ear as a result of falling when she passed out. So it was a complication of the concussion. And she's simply been unavailable to go testify in front of the Senate for the hearing. So now there's no point in having her show up. She is the only person who actually can shed light on whether or not she approved, as some reports have suggested, the upgrades in security for the Benghazi consulate. And I say it that way because it was not a consulate, ladies and gentlemen. The truth is out. The memos are out. Everything is out. This was a temporary building, and they were using this temporary building first to try and recruit locals to go fight the Syrians. Then they were using that and the CIA annexed nearby to try and round back up the guns they had been handing out, because why? They were afraid that the guns would be traced back to the American government by the American press. They know that most Americans would find it absolutely abhorrent that we were handing our best weapons over to the Muslim Brotherhood and to members of Al-Qaeda. You know, those guys that want to kill us just because they do? Yeah, that would be them. There's been so much political theater and intrigue and almost better than any soap opera you could come across since Benghazi started that it's clear the intentions are to keep everyone in the dark as much as possible. And the timing of everything that's went on can't possibly be coincidence. It's a use your brain moment, folks. There is no coincidence in this. Just like there's no coincidence in the fact that these people that were so outraged at the beginning of the day, by the end of the day can go back to their constituents and tell them, well, we won that fight, and it may not be coming as soon as it could have, but we've got that help on its way now. Well, just because a vote's been scheduled doesn't mean it's going to pass. And the $60 billion bill is still different than the bill for Sandy relief that was passed by the Senate. So there will have to be consolidations, and there's still a lot of work to be done before that money's going to be released. It's just the way it is. So the folks who are still suffering as a result of Hurricane Sandy, my heart goes out to you. All I can do is, at this point, is recommend any listener who's listening, please go to the Red Cross. You can do this online. You can text donations. You can do whatever. The Red Cross has been in there. They've been trying to help. I've been making contributions weekly since it happened. Not large contributions. I can't afford it. I've been taking flack from the wife over it, even because she's not happy that... not that she's against trying to help folks. Don't get me wrong. Not that. But just because, quite honestly, money's tight. But these people are suffering. And Obama, in one of his little speeches when he was railing against it being passed off, was at least right in so much as, here in America, when people are in trouble, we pull together. Well, that's as it should be. But it should be the people. Shouldn't be the policing power of government making those decisions for us. That's what happens when the Senate does what it's going to be doing. When Congress acts, they're telling us what we're going to do. As we careen towards the end of this session of Congress and the lame duck section of it moves towards an end, one of the first orders of business is Miss Dianne Feinstein and her making an attempt to further encroach upon the Second Amendment. Make no mistake about it, ladies and gentlemen, right now both our First and Second Amendment rights are under constant assault by the occupier in the White House and his many so-called progressive cronies. I've been asked the question in regards to the Second Amendment and whether there's even really any room towards confusion. Why does there seem to be difficulty in understanding the difference between whether or not every individual is guaranteed the right to own a firearm, or whether it's really only a militia / National Guard that has that right, a state militia. And the point is, and it's been said since Adam, that the bottom line is, if you really want to interpret what the founders meant, you have to understand what they were trying to say. Gun opponents should learn what the founders meant. When they wrote the Second Amendment, what is it that they really had in mind? Well, let me editorialize a little bit. Every individual with a sense of humanity detests seeing families destroyed, innocent children sacrificed, promising lives snuffed out. You know, exactly what we witnessed at the Sandy Hook school shooting. The argument that reducing the number of guns will produce a safer society, that just beguiles the public, and it promotes politicians, and it fails to hold the predator accountable for their actions. Disarming innocent people doesn't make innocent people safer. Yet the mob is even willing to punish innocent people for the acts of the wicked. While gun rights supporters assert that the right of the people to keep and bear arms, as found in the Second Amendment of our Constitution, is an individual right like the freedom of speech or religion, and has been supported by the Supreme Court, gun opponents assert that the right pertains only to collective bodies such as the militia, the military, the police, the National Guard. Even the Washington Post asserts that a gun opponent, that the sale, the manufacture, and possession of handguns ought to be banned. We do not believe the Second Amendment guarantees an individual right to keep them. Believing that our Constitution offers no protection for individual gun ownership, gun opponents therefore encourage efforts to restrict or ban citizens' access to firearms, particularly handguns. Even United States Senator Dianne Feinstein, Democrat from California, in her forthcoming legislation is planning to outlaw outright 120 separate individual-specific firearms. These opponents to our Second Amendment frequently utilize highly publicized tragic instances. Violent acts such as the Sandy Hook school shooting, the theater shootings in Colorado, and several other examples, to fortify their argument that guns should be left only in the hands of professionals. Even the ACLU, a supporter of Feinstein, surprise, has stated that, quote, the individual right to bear arms applies only to the preservation or efficiency of a well-regulated militia. Except for lawful police and military purposes, the possession of a weapon by individuals is not constitutionally protected. Cabinet Secretary of Education Duncan prefers to abandon our Constitution, stating in a speech that she gave in Washington, D.C., in an elementary school, Wonder what the intended effect there was. She said that we have common values that go far beyond the constitutional right to bear arms. Really? We're just going to ignore the Constitution now? Well, why not? Most of you guys have been ignoring it for a long time now anyway, right? The founding fathers of this nation understood that there exist inalienable rights that individuals possess, and that our American government was formed with the sole purpose of defending and protecting those individual inalienable rights. Among civil societies, this concept of safeguarding individual inalienable rights as the purpose of government is solely unique to our nation. That's it. We're the only one. The Second Amendment is one of those inalienable rights the Founding Fathers demanded of the government they created, embodied in our Constitution, and our office holders all take an oath to protect and defend that Constitution. Now, opponents will twist the Founders' original intent to argue that they never intended to allow citizens to be armed with semi-automatic rifles. The fact is that a common error in constitutional interpretation is failure to examine the document according to its original meaning. James Wilson, one of only 6 founders who signed both the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, was nominated by George Washington as an original justice on the Supreme Court. He said that the first and governing maxim in the interpretation of a statute is to discover the meaning of those who made it. Justice Joseph Story, who was appointed to the Supreme Court by James Madison, also emphasized this principle, declaring the first and fundamental rule in the interpretation of all documents is to construe them according to the sense of the terms of the intention of the parties. In other words, you got to know what they meant when they were doing it, or you're never going to understand it or be able to apply it to anything else. At the time it was framed, the Second Amendment was a certification to protect what was frequently called the first law of nature, the right of self-protection, an inalienable right, a right guaranteed to every citizen individually. To understanding the import of the Second Amendment's intention to secure an individual's inalienable right to keep and bear arms, it's important to establish the source of inalienable rights constitutionally. John Dickerson, one of the signers of the Constitution, like many others in his day, defined an inalienable right as a right which God gave to you and which no inferior power has the right to take away. Our founders believed that it was the duty of government, that government is an inferior power, by the way, to protect the inalienable rights from encroachment or from usurpation. This was made clear by Justice Wilson while he was serving as justice on the Supreme Court. To his law students, that the specific protections found in the government documents did not create new rights, but rather secured old rights. That our documents were merely, quote, to acquire a new security for the possession or the recovery of those rights, which we were previously entitled by the immediate gift or by the unerring law of our all-wise and all-beneficent Creator. Justice Wilson asserted that every government which has not this in its view as a principal object is not a government of legitimate kind. The founders of this nation understood the source of inalienable rights never from government. When government grants rights, governments can remove those rights. They understood that self-defense is an inalienable personal right. And the Second Amendment simply assures each citizen that they have the tools necessary